vuelta. Gracias por estar ahí con nosotros. Y ahora
Hi, and welcome back. And now I'm going to present you one of our great friends, Pedro Andrade. He is a VP of Public Policy for Facebook Latam. Hi, Pedro. He's been joining us right from the word go. Hi from Adrian, who's backstage, who sent us his greetings. Pedro, welcome to our 13th edition of the school. We have 500 interns, and now we're online. We have interns joining us from all over the world with simultaneous translation. We can reach around the world. And this is a very interesting subject, the challenge of content moderation. There's lots of information out there on internet these days, not necessarily always the right information, nor is it always correct. Some special websites have been set up to attract people's attention, and then they send them to places where there's fake information, which it's just the wrong stuff. So we need to talk about content moderation and how we're working with these new challenges. Perhaps earlier, the challenges about internet governance were more about technical infrastructure, but now they seem to be more about fake news, disinformation, the impact of artificial intelligence, algorithms. It's changed over the last few years. We're very grateful to you for being with us today. Hope you're well. I saw you online in Casa Rosada recently when we were talking about something like this. I look forward to meeting up with you in person, hopefully in the near future, and welcome to our school. Thank you very much, Olga. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and a great honor to be working with the school. I remember when it first started, and after these 13 editions, it's a joy to see how much it's grown and to see how it's developed and how it's become a training and dialogue platform on key subjects, the subjects that are so important for our region, really. So I want to thank you and greet Adrian and all of our participants for being here with today so that we can reflect about this subject, which is content moderation. There are different aspects to this. Some of them are very complex, but I do think it's going to be good to start talking about the context of this discussion. And I think that we need to get a bit of a perspective on this. Some of those of us who've been working on these issues for a long time find it interesting to look back when we start these discussions and also reflect on where we are today. I think that one of the key points involved in understanding the complexity of content moderation is by looking at the volume involved. First, I'd like to talk about the numbers of people connected. Over the last 3 decades, lots of things have changed, and of course, internet has changed dramatically. To have an idea, just in the last 5 years, there are 1.5 billion extra users. Now we are 5.2 billion people online. Most of these people are connected to social media platforms, social networks, messaging platforms, whose content is created by users themselves. This is an unprecedented access to information and to the possibility of sharing ideas and opinions to incredibly broad audiences. This is going to happen, obviously, at the beginning of the internet, but the planetary scope achieved by internet, the dimension it has, was inconceivable 50 years or 30 years ago. This gives us an idea of how many people are using these platforms today. There are many people who are access to internet today and use these platforms. American Dialogue, which is working in these areas and dealing with the different areas of ways of regulating these new areas of opinion sharing which internet is shaping. And this has been happening since the mid 1990s, really. With the planetary impact that I mentioned earlier, it's affecting social development, economic and cultural development too. And from the point of view of human rights, it has become a catalyzer for people to enjoy universal human rights. And this encompasses freedom of expression to the right to health, and that we've seen this very much over the last year and a half, how platforms are being used to tackle the pandemic that we're all trying to live through. Global connectivity, as well as the economic aspect, is empowering companies of all shapes and sizes, SMEs, self-employed, professionals, families. It's given everybody access to knowledge and revolutionized education. And it certainly put us to the test over the last 18 months. It has created greater efficiency for the state. It's greater scope. It's reaching places where it wasn't earlier. It's increasing people's ability to help. We see these charities, bloods, the donations, all kinds of initiatives. And I think that one of the key points is how this has helped to create a more plural voices in the political dialogue so that everybody feels represented and that they have a role to play. If you analyze the impact of internet on society today, if we look back 20 years, I continue to support the validity of this concept. Internet is a mirror and a magnifying glass on society. It shows everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We live in a world where there are luckily far more good people than bad people, and that is reflected on the overall positive impact on internet, on society, which helps us to progress. Those of us who deal with governance and regulatory issues are focused on the problems, but we should not ignore the positive impact of internet over these last 30 years on society as a whole, which means that we are now in a much better place than where we were. Remember how hard it was, even 15, 20 years ago, to communicate with people abroad, with loved ones abroad. And now, and yesterday we had a refresher course on what it was like to be without these platforms. And the magnifying aspect of internet has created visibility and tools for a number of different sectors. As I said, it's a magnifying glass and it's a mirror for society and different sectors and actors. Many of these actors work behind the scenes for society and they use different platforms, abuse the rules of use, and use different tools to spread fake news, inciting fraud or violence. And as such, to build a secure environment for users, the companies who run the platforms have to take lots of decisions about thousands of pieces of content created every day by their users to decide which ones they should be controlling. There are more and more questions about the moderation, its scope, transparency, and accountability. In this sense, the Inter-American Dialogue report says that there are controversial positions. Some say it should lie at moderation decisions should lie in the hands of the platforms, others that say that it should lie with the government authorities. This is an example of a problem which is actually really quite complex. Unlike a simple problem such as total automation, we are take spam. Spam is a really big problem, and some email platforms have been able to deal with this. It was initially very complex, but thanks to technology, it is now easier to do. A complex problem is one such as you incorporate more and more resources, but content moderation is not growing exponentially, matched by all kinds of different information in all kinds of formats and languages, but also requires a contextual analysis of this content, often shot through with different points of view, which are independently valid. But you have to see how they work in this context. And there are many rights which collide, added to generational differences and different circumstances to justify these points of view. This is what makes content moderation so complex. We need to be asking ourselves some questions at this point. What is the right solution? And who should be in charge of it? What would be the best practices that should be applied in a framework of a world that has changed so much since the 1990s and in which Latin America has an important role to play? These are some of the questions that I would like to address from a critical point of view with you today. To give you greater context, I would like to talk to you about Facebook's attitude to content moderation and talk to you about some of the challenges that the company is facing in Latin America. This is just one of many different perspectives of companies that are having to deal with these challenges. Facebook, as I said, like internet, is operating on an unprecedented scale, as is the company. 2 billion people access Facebook platforms every day, and millions of pieces of content are shared every day on Facebook, Instagram, between many different countries and cultures. To understand the global nature of Facebook and its family of apps, over 87% of people who use Facebook live outside the US and Canada. Content policy and moderation decisions are very tough, often require a delicate balance to be struck between freedom of expression and for people to be heard, as well as include other fundamental values of replying to our communities, such as security, dignity, privacy, and authenticity. Many of us decided to get involved in technology issues because we believe that it is a democratizing force to empower people. However, there is also a responsibility involved in keeping people secure in the face of terrorism and intimidation. We also have a broader social responsibility in helping to connect people against extremism and polarization. Some of the main questions we are facing are: what should be the limits of what people can say? What content should be allowed and recommended, and what should be eliminated? And who should be taking these decisions? Who should be guaranteeing to those people and making them accountable? There is no general consensus on any of these questions at all. We don't have a acceptable definition of hate crime or hate information, which makes it really difficult to set global standards which are compatible with human rights laws. And to make this even more complex, cultural standards differ from one country to the next and are changing all the time. This is visible even more in a plural and diverse and asymmetric region like ours. I would like to summarize the approach we are taking in Facebook as follows. I already mentioned community regulations, which are like, living together standards, cohabitation, what we allow and what we don't at Facebook. We want to prevent damage offline. We want to ensure that the people in our community feel safe. And we've published our internal regulations that our teams use to ensure that these standards, these community regulations are met. They are designed to reduce subjectivity and ensure that the decisions taken by the reviewers are as coherent as possible. Let me give you an example. According to our violent and graphic content policy, we eliminate content which glorifies violence, suffering, or the humiliation of others. However, this is part of the complexity involved in this question. There are other contexts and reasons where this kind of content could be shared. For instance, to draw attention to abuses of human rights, or to call on the media organizations to cover such abuses. We have different aspects of sensitivity within our community, allowing us to draw lines between what we where we put a warning sign up or what we allow to be distributed freely. We have developed tools to proactively identify and eliminate hate publications, posts, and eliminate polemic content. As a result, the prevalence of hate speech on our platform has been reduced by reduced down to 0.05%. This means that over the last quarter, 5 of each 10,000 views of content had hate speech. We continue working to reduce these numbers. But it's important to say that we're not working alone to develop these community standards. This is part of the process of delegating power. And what we are doing is seeking help. Every time we need to change an existing policy or add a new one, we involve experts and communities from all around the world, including Latin America, to bring their experience to the table. We have hundreds of people working to bring different points of view and evaluate the potential impact of our policies on different communities around the world. But obviously, there is still a great deal to be done, and we need to expand our work further. Sometimes it's easy to say what is black and white, but in fact, it's much more difficult to handle gray areas or problematic content. For instance, the awareness service is already protected by human or rights division, dignity, privacy. We always take bear in mind the principles of people's individual human rights to ensure that these are respected. We want to strike a balance between companies and people. We want to ensure that there is an authentic environment. When our independent data verifiers check information, we can diminish distribution and label content which has been identified as fake. Over this last year, we have seen a growing reaction from certain public sectors to the application of moderation content to expressions of hate or inciting violence or misinformation. Many of them come from these self-same actors who are trying to limit the ability of platforms to moderate content. Oftentimes, under the supposed right to protect freedom of expression. Now, I want to refer to what happened at the beginning after the Capitol events. I think you should all read this. It's a declaration of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, which expressed its concern with the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights. They expressed their concern about the general deterioration in on the way that people are taking public violence from online to physical spaces. And they also criticized the attempt to change to distort public debate thanks to misinformation. The Commission was very clear. Not only did it open a space for debate about content moderation, but also it called upon people in positions of importance and representativeness to contribute to ensuring that such expressions of hate, violence, and discrimination be reduced. As I said, internet is at once a mirror for and a magnifying glass of society and what happens within it. Bearing in mind the huge amounts of information handled every day, it is necessary to rely on AI, which can proactively identify potentially dangerous and damaging content so we can take measures more quickly, and that our reviewers are able to handle the more problematic cases which require a human touch. The use of technology still is challenging, but I think that we're getting there. As happens with all machine learning processes, a key question is, which we are asking ourselves, is how can we ensure that our systems detect where people are treated unjustly? There is a new approach to the issues of ethics and artificial intelligence, and we are working with specialized teams to develop an approach. We are also focused on increasing transparency and accountability when it comes to content moderation. We put our community standards at the disposal of everybody and are producing a compliance report so that we can check the progress and Facebook security in general. We have also opened our content moderation systems to external auditors. And as we said in May, there is an independent external audit underway. We also commit to presenting an annual report on human rights, which very few companies do, as part of our recent corporate policy on human rights, which seeks not only to respect the International Convention of Human Rights, but also the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights, with a special recognition of the leadership exercised by the region in the area of human rights. This helps us to tackle very complex questions when it comes to content moderation. People also have the opportunity to make a complaint about content if we haven't spotted, so that it can be considered if it should be eliminated or not, including the eliminating somebody's profile. And something that we've been working on for the last year or so is for users to have the option to appeal against our decisions with the board. This is a new independent supervisory board. It's made up of global experts, and they look at the hardest decisions taken about content, and they take binding decisions for the company about this kind of content and emits policy recommendations. The appeals process gives people the opportunity to challenge content decisions taken by Facebook. For instance, as a response to recommendations by the board, we are trying to be as specific as possible when we reply to people about why we eliminate content, and we are reviewing the procedures about how we respond to people to explain to them whether automation was involved in the decision or not. This came as a result of a case that came up in Brazil. What we also consider to be a step forward in transparency and content moderation is that we have published a Center of Transparency with guidelines for content moderation. Although community standards make it very clear what kind of content is eliminated, the guidelines explain what kind of content receives limited distribution because it's either problematic or of bad quality. The future of content moderation is one of great amount of work. We're always going to come up against problems. Sometimes there are problems that just can't be fixed, but we're trying to mitigate this constantly. It is necessary to create oversight mechanisms And the right regulatory practices are a key part of a complete governance system when it comes to content moderation. In the most recent Freedom of the Net report 2021, new laws for social networks are being adopted around the world, most of which seek to restrict freedom of expression even more and make it easier for government authorities to access people's personal information. For example, by requiring from social network companies to designate a legal representative and deal with data at local level. They've even tried to limit the possibility of content moderation by decree, attacking new standards which are critical for development of internet in the region, as this most recent decree in Brazil, which was rejected by the legislative power and the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, it has already been lodged as a bill with Congress. It is important to bear in mind the latest report of the human rights in 2019, where we talk about the importance of respecting fundamental values of independency, the rule of law, to strengthen, enrich the debate on content. As Mark Zuckerberg said, if we were starting from zero, we wouldn't be asking companies to lie, to take these judgments by themselves. This is why we are committed to dialogue, to seeking solutions. A good example is a multisectoral dialogue about freedom of expression being headed up by the Human Rights Commission and the Freedom of Expression Commission. We need common standards about content, and any new norms about these should suggest a framework for balance between preserving the freedom of expression and reducing the prevalence of damaging content while fostering innovation. Current regulations have created the conditions for internet to prosper, and regulatory principles of the 1990s continue to be relevant today. But internet has changed so much. So we support multiple stakeholder efforts to review these laws and to bring the laws into line with current reality. Protecting intermediaries regarding certain kinds of content could be conditioned by the capacity of companies to comply with best practices to combat the dissemination of this kind of content. This would be a proportional approach. These best practices should be established by an external organ, and the new rules should focus on providing even more transparency, accountability, and oversight for the processes used by companies to create and thus comply with content which is damaging but yet legal. I have shared with you today different aspects about the main challenges facing us with content moderation. I think I have helped to show you just how incredibly complex it is, and the future depends on our being able to be constructive about how we tackle this in a constructive and multi-sectoral approach. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Excellent, Pedro. A round of applause for you. Yeah, it's a process. You said something that was very interesting. Some things that were solved, like minimizing the impact and all of that. You have so many pillars and exacerbate so much with the large number of users using the internet, with the socioeconomic reality of every region, sub-region, cultural aspects, political, religious aspects. So it's very, very complex. There are many comments. We don't have time, but I was listening to your presentation at Pink House in Argentina. Could you tell us something about the data verifiers that Facebook use to see if these users are independent? There are many questions related to that topic. And also, I would like to underscore the effort made by private companies, especially Facebook. You were studying, analyzing like privacy enhancement, good practices, and all that. So it's I know that companies are adapting and learning from good practices and lessons learned. I'm very optimistic about technology, so I want to be optimistic about this issue that is not that the responsibility lies in a company but in society as a whole. But could you tell us something about the data verifiers? How do you pick them? What kind of sort of training you impart in Facebook and things like that? Yeah, we are working with a network of data verifiers across the world. I think that includes more than 65 verifiers, independent data verifiers, that they make up the fact-checking alliance and the quality standards included because of their affiliation. Even we have media verifying data. There are many data verifiers that are well known, like Chequeado, Lupa, Olfatos. And we have signed agreements with news agencies. And we are adding more stakeholders because it's a large project, and that's why there's a lot to do, especially with journalists and with journalists, in verifying this data and in coming up with a good solution. To tell you the truth, we've been expanding these horizons, covering many languages. And Latin America is well represented in the main markets with fact-checking agencies to provide the right context. That's why it's good thinking to do it with local agencies to analyze the complexity of analyzing the environment where we operate, where the environment where people post or their voice, their expressions or comments. Good. Also, users that read the information should reflect upon that and should study or analyze the source of information they are receiving. You know, like my mother tells me, yeah, I heard it over the internet or TV or radio or whatever. But you never know the context because user or content consumers should be educated about the source, and working with the journalists and with the media is very, very important. Thank you for commenting on the data verifiers. We're running out of time, so we would like to thank you for your support, in the South School of Internet Governance. We like every time you participate, and hopefully we're going to hold an in-person meeting in the future. Olga, same to you. I look forward to meeting you soon, and hopefully that in the next SSI AG edition that we can host an in-person event. But I know that there's always going to be an online event. It's here to stay. We can give you information on the Fact Checker program and some material that we can share with the attendees. And also some of the things that I commented. Not only the fact-checking program, but also we provide you with information and material that you can read. So I'll be at your disposal. Thank you. Thanks, Pedro. And we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Gracias.